On today's show, we're joined by the host of the Locked On Kings podcast, Matt George. We talk about Luke Walton's firing, why it happened, what it means now for Sacramento. It's all coming up. Stick around.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of Locked On NBA. My name is Josh Lloyd. I'm your host on a Monday. You can also find me hosting the Locked On Fantasy Basketball channel, so check me out over there. Thanksgiving is coming up, and that means delicious food, but often high-calorie food. Why don't you institute a new tradition at your family Thanksgiving dinner? For dessert, have Built Bars. Instead of a slice of pie, which is like 400 calories, a Built Bar is delicious, it's covered in 100% real chocolate, and it's just 130 calories. Low carb, low sugar, low fat, but high in protein and absolutely delicious. Instead of coconut cream pie, why don't you have a coconut Built Bar? A raspberry Built Bar instead of a raspberry pie. The opportunities you have there are endless, and they've got great flavors coming out all the time. A new one, vanilla cream, just hit the shelves. We had cherry lime drop a few weeks ago. Great flavors, and you can get them now also at 15% off. So head to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, and you can save 15% off your boxes of Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar ever. So here he is, the host of the Locked On Kings podcast. Matt George is here. Matt, I could ask you a question that I'm sure you don't know the answer to, but what is the difference between firing Luke Walton 17 games into this season versus doing it in May?
As in May,
as in
of
the May that just passed, 2021.
May 2021. The difference is that you would have had an entire offseason to undergo a legitimate coaching search when there were legitimate candidates out there, so you didn't have to worry about going through this coaching saga, this coaching carousel, restarting the ride up again, while in the midst of a season that you, and I'm using you as Monty McNair, general manager of the Kings and the Kings front office and really ownership as well, you've labeled this season a playoffs or bust type season, and now you're undermining that focus that has already been questionable with another, not just mid-season coaching change, early season coaching change. I'm not a fan of the move, not necessarily because of Luke Walton. I'm sure we'll get into this more because of how the Kings are continuing a horrific pattern that has been set over the last 15 plus seasons. And this is just another example of questionable, poor, embarrassing decision-making by the Sacramento Kings organization.
Oh, look, it's dreadful. There's no getting around this because, as you said, Luke Walton probably should have been hired. All right, we can't go back and change it. After year one, didn't look great. All right, he's got a couple of years left on his contract. And then after year two, it just looked terrible. Like, he just performed poorly. This is not his role to be an NBA head coach. It's not for him, and that's fine. He can be an NBA assistant head coach. But then, as you said, they're cheap and they don't want to pay him out. What's the difference now, 3 months later, when, again, you don't have the opportunity to go and hire a Wes Unseld Jr., Jamal Mosley, who's doing such great things in Orlando with that young group. You don't have that opportunity. You just got to promote whoever your lead assistant is. They don't have the opportunity to bring in their own staff, their own scheme, their own ideas. Gentry's just going to be running basically the same thing that Walton did, because that's what they've been doing for the last 3 months. So nothing really is going to change that much in season. Yes, maybe it gives you a leg up on other candidates that might appear throughout the season. But Gentry's going to have this chance to prove himself now when you didn't go through a legitimate coaching search. So none of it. I ask you that question, what's the difference? I know what the difference is. It's a good organization versus a bad organization as to when you make those decisions. And making it at this point is ludicrous. Like, what tipped the scales? Because I know from an outside perspective that he wasn't cut out for this job, and I could have told you that 18 months ago, if not earlier. I'm sure you have your thoughts on how Walton succeeded as a coach, but what tipped the scales that this weekend, this is the time that he's got to go?
Well, actually, before I get to that, too, something that you were talking about, it pings something in my brain and the brain of many who follow the Sacramento Kings organization and who have followed this organization for the last 8+ years, that owner Vivek Ranadive has been in control here in Sacramento, and that's who is making the decision. If Monty McNair is truly making the decision this upcoming offseason, or I'm sorry, this past offseason, to commit to Luke Walton. Luke Walton is his guy going forward, which is very strange when a new general manager comes in and inherits an old coach. You typically don't see that too often. So if that truly is Monty McNair's decision, how, after just a couple of months and 16 or however many games into the season, how does that change that drastically? It leaves the door open continually for speculation, that it wasn't fully Monty McNair's decision to begin with. We know Vivek Ranadive has gotten involved in decision-making in the past. We know he's implemented advisors like currently Joe Dumars is there in the past. We also know the financial situation with the Sacramento Kings organization, how much money they lost during COVID and how that has an effect. Plus, even before COVID started, we know that minority Sacramento Kings owners, many of which just sold their shares, were not happy with the Kings consistently and constantly paying former head coaches that had yet to be fired. So what you were saying there brought that to mind. But really, what was the straw that broke the camel's back? I don't necessarily know if there was one. I mean, I said coming into this season that I thought if the Kings don't make the playoffs, Luke Walton is more than certainly gone. I said that if Walton and the Kings go through another 9-game losing streak, which they had 2 separate ones last season, then he was more than likely gone on the spot. But it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, why now? I mean, I get it. Like, if you want to make him your fall guy, that's fine. Except nobody in Sacramento with a basic IQ and a brain is buying that Luke Walton was the main problem with this organization. Partial problem, sure. He had questionable rotation decisions. His offensive schemes, his defensive schemes. Like, there were things that Luke Walton did and tried to implement that simply didn't work. Signs of a poor coach. But this team is also filled with holes from a roster standpoint. There's been questionable decision-making from front office and even higher up from ownership for almost a decade here now in Sacramento. So it's the biggest issue that I have with this entire thing, Josh, is that coaches are so often made out to be fall guys. And I think the biggest thing that I wanted to make sure to express on Locked On Kings and here on Locked On NBA is that I will not allow Luke Walton to be the fall guy for players and ownership that don't deserve it. There are much bigger problems than Luke Walton here in this organization. So what changed? I guess it was convenient with the Kings losing games to get rid of one guy to say that they're making steps forward or actually making a change when one needs to happen, when in reality, it's not the main change that needs to happen, at least in my opinion.
So do you think that there is a chance that this, you talk about convenience of like, okay, well, we're getting smashed in these games at the moment. Someone's got to take the fall. Is it a way to take the heat off, say, an underperforming max contract point guard who maybe not be playing up to the level that he has in the past?
To me, this adds more heat to it because you have to understand Dave Yeager, who was also the head coach of this core, he was fired, and he was fired for not getting along with this core. Now, we didn't hear too much about any kind of fractured relationship with him and De'Aaron Fox. It was more Buddy Hield and Marvin Bagley at the time. But the overall point is, you had this head coach in Dave Yeager who was fired because he I guess, failed with this exact same core that got the players coach, their guy in Luke Walton, who they still like to this day. Luke never lost the Kings locker room. That's a very important thing to note here. The players did not quit on Walton at all, even if they weren't playing successfully. They never quit on Walton, and still that guy got fired. They weren't good enough for that guy. So now there's, I think, extra heat on De'Aaron Fox and that core as a whole. There's been 2 separate coaches that have come through here, and there are a lot of similarities in their philosophy between the 2 coaches. A great example is like Buddy Hield being a bench player instead of being a starter. And 2 guys have failed. 2 guys haven't worked. I don't think it takes heat off of De'Aaron Fox at all. And I think as now Alvin Gentry takes over, as fans are going to see and as people who follow the Kings are going to see, I don't expect this team to get any better. This is not going to be a Nate McMillan Atlanta Hawks last season situation in Sacramento. This team's not going to suddenly turn things around because Luke Walton is gone. Alvin Gentry's not going to come here and, like you said earlier, reinvent the wheel. He has pretty similar philosophies to what Luke Walton had. And Luke, when we found out that Alvin Gentry was joining Luke, the idea was that Gentry was going to take over the offense and Luke could kind of focus on the defense. Well, the offense, to me, has been just as bad as the defense unless the Kings are getting out in transition. The half-court offense has been dreadful. So you mean to tell me that Alvin Gentry now being in charge, he's going to suddenly change so many things that everything's going to click for this Kings team and suddenly they're going to be back into the playoff picture like we were all hoping? Give me a break.
Yeah, I said the same thing on Locked On Fantasy today. Like, don't expect interim coaches to come in and everything's going to be different. The whole offensive scheme, the rotations, it's going to be basically the same. There'll be some small tweaks, maybe integrated. Maybe they play 1 or 2 possessions faster per game. Maybe they don't. Who knows? It's not like they were down the bottom of the league in pace. I think they were 10th or 11th before today's games. So it's not like there's going to be this wholesale. And it's impossible to do. Like, you're on the road. Like, you're traveling the whole time. You don't have practices. You can't just say, well, all right, I was here sitting with Luke, and I disagree with everything he said, but now it's my turn to show you everything, because that's not how coaching works. It wasn't like Luke was saying, I'm doing this, and all you other guys get stuff that don't care what you say. They all worked on that together. So it's just going to be more of the same thing with just marginal sort of tweaks, I would guess. So it isn't, while the front office / ownership might think that it's this defining move that saves things, I'm with you. I don't really think it changes that much. But it is going to be interesting. Tomorrow we get the first game with Alvin Gentry in charge, or Monday, depending on when you're listening to this. Matt, you'll cover it all for us over on the Locked On Kings podcast. Thanks for coming on Locked On NBA with me.
I wish it was under better circumstances, but hey, we're used to this here in Sacramento. I don't know why head coach number 11 since 2006 will be different, but hey, flip a coin. Maybe this time it'll work.
At some point it's got to come up heads. Thanks, Matt.